Thank you, Stan. I am delighted to be able to introduce, at least just for this morning, our presenters. And as Stan has noted, we run a tight ship and we want to keep to our timing. Our first presenter today is John Emond. John is a retired NASA headquarters program manager and collector of a range of items associated with the American Revolution, the War of 1812, and the Civil War, as well as NASA mission emblems. He's a volunteer with two committees within the Maryland Center of History and Culture, and he joined NAVA in 2021. John's paper presented at NAVA 57 in Philadelphia, Capture the Flag, Flags in the American Civil War, was published in Vexillological number 28 last year, 2024. Today, he's turning to another important historical moment, 9/11. John.
Okay, thanks very much. And I'm very honored to have the chance to present today. Flags of 9/11. The attack on Pearl Harbor, December 7th, 1941, was a defining moment of the 20th century. The coordinated attacks on 9/11 using planes as suicide weapons of mass terror are one of the defining moments of the 21st century. Many alive today, many of you today, know exactly where you were when you heard or saw what happened on that day. A day when American Airlines Flight 11 and United Airlines Flight 175 plowed into the Twin Towers, New York World Trade Center. American Airlines Flight 77 struck the Pentagon. And in the skies above Shanksville, Pennsylvania, brave passengers and crew fought back. Due to their courageous efforts, United Airlines Flight 93 plunged into the ground at full speed rather than the Capitol or White House. From NASA headquarters rooftop, where I worked on that day, plumes of smoke could be seen. That's headquarters building on the left. Plumes of smoke could be seen rising from the Pentagon. Thousands died on 9/11. Each victim, each first responder, many of whom were also victims. Each action later taken in memory of those who died or inspired by the heroism of 9/11 deserves their story told. No presentation, certainly not mine alone, no presentation can give the full length of the story of what happened to so many people on that day. And they deserve to have their story told as well. So I can't do that, but at least by offering 4 stories, it can give at least honor and recognition to the far greater number of people impacted by 9/11. Of sacrifice, defiance, unity, inspiration, honor, appreciation, and remembrance forever associated with 9/11. In each of these 4 stories I'll be sharing with you, the American flag played a vital symbolic role. Defiance, inspiration, sacrifice. In the midst of the massive debris field remains of the Twin Towers, 3 firemen raised a large American flag above ground zero. This powerful image of defiance against terror clearly stood on its own as a response to the attacks of 9/11. But this moment also paid tribute to a similar flag raising 56 years earlier, the flag raising on Japan's Iwo Jima Mount Suribachi, February 23rd, 1945. There were actually 2 flag raisings that day. Many people may not realize that. The image on the far left was the first flag raising. And by the way, look closely, you'll notice there's a soldier carrying a carbine. That in itself is the true meaning of what a color guard did. I gave a presentation on Capture the Flag talking about the role of color guards. And it's far more than a ceremonial homage. It was in a real defense of others who could not hold a weapon as they were carrying out important procedures. So it's in recognition of that day that you see the image of the firefighters raising the flag. The second image that's in the middle was the one that's most known. It was a larger flag to give visual inspiration to the Marines and infantry still fighting below the summit of Iwo Jima. Sadly, these images are also linked by sacrifice. At Iwo Jima, if those who raised the flags on that day hoped that historic moment might herald an end to the fighting, at least on Iwo Jima, they would have been sadly mistaken. 6 Americans took part in each flag raising. Of the first flag raising, 2 were later killed, 2 wounded. Of the second flag raising later that day, 3 died in battle on Iwo Jima. As far as 9/11, of the at Ground Zero, beyond the 343 New York City firefighters, 71 New York City law enforcement officers who died in the collapse of the Twin Towers, and 55 military personnel who died in the Pentagon, many responders who joined in the initial rescue and then grim recovery efforts in the toxic cauldron of the debris field succumbed to cancer and other diseases directly linked to exposure on 9/11 and the days that followed. Numbers are conservatively in the hundreds and could be much greater, along with many individuals still today battling cancer and disease arising from their heroic efforts on that day and in the days that followed. Unity, comfort. The initial rescue efforts that painfully turned into recovery were massive undertakings. In addition to first responder, police, and firefighters who survived the collapse of the Twin Towers or were sent along with National Guard to aid in the recovery and then rescue and then recovery efforts, were those who answered the call as volunteers. On 9/11, Detective Arthur Giammarino, a retired New York City police detective, was driving a friend to his friend's doctor when the radio announced a plane crash into one of the Twin Towers. They then saw Flight 175 smash into the South Tower. Later that day, a call went out for first responder volunteers. This is a hard hat that Detective Giammarino wore on 9/11 and on the days and weeks that followed. Detective Giammarino had a cargo van, and from September 11th to the 18th, he brought supplies and personnel to and from Ground Zero. He also helped with recovery efforts. From October 2001 until June 2002, Detective Giammarino worked at the Staten Island Forensic Recovery Site. Debris from Ground Zero passed through a series of grills that emptied into a conveyor belt. Workers lined each side of the belt and removed anything of a DNA nature or remains, which were discovered and then delivered to the medical examiner's office. Identification items like IDs, driver's licenses, name tags, and first responder badges were collected and cataloged. Quick point, if you notice his hat, if you notice in the picture, it may be hard to make out, but you can actually see some of the workers also having, again, it's a really small image, but also wearing those white hats, the same that he wore on that day and the time to follow. While engaged in this work, Detective Giammarino later described as difficult and heartbreaking were words and symbols that took on added meaning. The words "United We Stand" are in printed script below an American flag on a hard hat he wore, the same hard hat I showed a moment ago. On either side are American flag decals. The "United We Stand" line, banner, reference may be worn in a lot of hard hats to this day as kind of a sense of unity, as a standard kind of message. But there was nothing standard, nothing common, nothing workplace that was taking place that day. By no means a normal working day. On a poignant, very personal note, Detective Giammarino carried a small 6.5 by 4-inch American flag tucked inside his hard hat. That's the image that's on the right. Another American flag was either attached to an all-terrain vehicle, ATV, at the site, or was one of the flags placed next to the debris conveyor belt as workers are sorting through, trying to separate precious items, precious human remains from the debris itself. As many recall, in the days following 9/11, the American flag was seen everywhere as an expression of national unity. But for those at Ground Zero and the forensic recovery site, combing through the mounds of debris that had once been the majestic World Trade Center towers, or carefully sifting along the moving conveyor belt to locate DNA remains or personal identification to help determine the victims of 9/11, The presence of American flags, including what Detective Giammarino held, placing a flag inside his hard hat, I believe gave comfort and a sense of shared order and mission within the landscape of horror, desolation, and carnage. Honor, appreciation, remembrance. As I noted before, each victim of 9/11 has a personal story that really should be told. But one victim's personal story inspired an initiative in honor, appreciation, and remembrance of thousands who lost their life on 9/11. Dr. Dora Menchaca, a 45-year-old biomedical scientist at Amgen Pharmaceutical Company in California, and the image of Amgen in California is on the right, flew to Washington, D.C. on September 9th, 2001 to meet FDA officials regarding potential new drug developments to treat prostate cancer. Well, the meeting actually ended a bit early, ended on September 10th, and Dr. Menchaca used the opportunity to hopefully catch a flight home the morning of September 11th. She boarded American Airlines Flight 77. I mentioned the smoke billowing from the Pentagon, seen by headquarters, was from American Airlines Flight 77. Dr. Menchaca was a marathon runner. After 9/11, to honor Dr. Menchaca in death for her lifelong dedication to work and family, there was talk of flying on the NASA space shuttle a marathon award medallion she had received in one of the marathon competitions. That initial concept of trying to recognize one individual by flying her runner medallion was actually evolved and expanded into a much broader scope that became known as Flags for Heroes and Families. STS-108 launched on December 5th, 2001, the first shuttle mission after 9/11. In addition to a range of life science and other experiments on board Endeavour STS-108, NASA flew an important grouping of flags in memory of the tragedy that was 9/11. A flag found at the World Trade Center attacks, a U.S. flag that had flown above the Pentagon State Capitol, a U.S. Marine Corps color flag retrieved from the Pentagon, a New York Fire Department flag, and a poster that included photographs of firefighters lost in the attacks. The largest group of 9/11 memorial commemoration items flown were 6,000 small 3.5 by 5 flags. You can see astronaut Mark Kelly is on the left. Those flags were then placed on certificates and given out to the families who had lost loved ones in 9/11. They were also given at police stations, fire stations, for those who had lost members on 9/11. And yes, Dr. Menchaca's medallion was flown on the shuttle. There was also a special ceremony at the United Flight 93 Memorial in Shanksville. An American flag flown on the shuttle was presented to the National Park Service by NASA Administrator Bill Gerstenmaier on the far left. The last story, Land of the Free because of the Brave. Paul Eisman is an exhibit designer from Pennsylvania. Oops. He and his brother were horrified by what they saw on 9/11. And given their experience and skill in exhibit design, they wanted to do something to show their own reaction to what happened on that day. They created an 8 by 10 foot mural with a banner, Land of the Free because of the Brave. The murals featured the Statue of Liberty, the banner title itself, and a flowing American flag. The murals traveled to Ground Zero in New York, Shanksville, Pennsylvania, as well as police stations, fire stations who had lost first responders. The murals also traveled to other police and fire stations in addition to other organizations. Now, this was not just to view. These murals were not meant for viewing only. Signatures and comments were encouraged, especially from those who were part of rescue and recovery efforts on 9/11 and the days that followed, or who at that moment were active duty personnel, and they were encouraged to share their feelings and how they were reacting to the mural. In support of warfighters that were deployed overseas, the murals were sent to Iraq and Afghanistan. Here at Bagram Air Base, one of the murals was on display for personnel in transit to their assigned operational base. On a day of horror, shock, anger, chaos, and loss, the American flag stood out. It symbolized the strength of one nation, one people. It gave comfort as something familiar, a constant in the midst of so much change in so short a time. And in the days that followed 9/11, the American flag was a frequently seen important element in healing and resolve. People may forget we were a deeply divided nation in the presidential election of the year 2000. Recall Hanging Chad. And for you younger members, no, that's not a rock group. But it's important to remember how deeply divided and how everybody came together after 9/11 as one people. Today, we face external threats in a turbulent world. And clearly, we're facing internal discord. We pulled together, we rallied as a nation in the days that followed 9/11, and we can do it again. We must. Thank you.
It's more of a comment. I was there at Fort Myer, and my husband was actually in the Pentagon at the time. But if you ever get the chance to take a tour of the Pentagon, what I find is fascinating is there is a map that shows where everyone was, but more importantly, it shows where they should have been. And it is very deeply moving. And just even to go there, to the outside it's quite something.
Absolutely. I can, looks like we have a little bit of time. I can convey something that I know of directly. Jim Hull was an exhibit supporter, the exhibit developer. And I had worked with Jim on a number of exhibits when NASA was at a given conference or a convention. Jim, on 9/11, was supposed to fly to California. He had two choices. This is absolutely a true story. Two choices: a direct flight that was a little bit more expensive to the government, or a bit longer flight that was cheaper, but it was longer. And in the discussion prior to 9/11, Jim was talking to his wife, and she was saying, look, many times you worked extra hours and didn't charge the government a penny. Give yourself a little bit of a break. Take the flight that's more direct. It's going to save a little bit wear and tear on you, and you've earned it by all the time you put in and never charged for that time. So he took the more direct flight. This was from Washington, D.C. The other flight he was going to choose was Flight 75 into the Pentagon. There are so many stories of people knowing near misses, what could have happened, whatever, or what was happening when Jim was in the air and 9/11 happened. Every plane was basically directed to go to the nearest airport they could possibly land now. And he remembered being in the plane when they just, literally the pilot found the first airport he was authorized to land in, and they landed. It was that kind of moment in time. I can tell you gridlock, it took us hours to even get out of Washington, D.C., because it was an absolute chaotic scene. So it's something that, much like people that lived through December 7th will never forget, those of us who lived through 9/11, and thank you for sharing your story, will also never forget.
John, I know you're a great collector of many things. How many of the flags that you've shown here or associated with 9/11 are in your collection?
Great question, Ted. I can tell you, because there's a bit of a backstory here too, I can tell you that flag, the hard hat that I showed you, and those two flags are in my collection. It actually, during the reception, or break, I can tell you a lot more detail, but that is not in my usual area of collecting, but I saw it advertised for auction, and it was such a powerful sense of contact with history that it really called out to me. The idea, and I really like to personalize. Sometimes an object, this could be a goblet, 18th century, no story to it. That's one thing. If you have something that connects to an individual, that raises it 5 levels of importance. And knowing that flag you see right there is one, that's the flag that would have been on the ATV vehicle belt, conveyor belt. He'd actually signed his name to that. So knowing I've got that and the smaller flag and the hard hat he wore on that day is really powerful and really poignant. So anytime there's an opportunity to connect with someone's life, it takes it out of the realm of a generic artifact of history and really raises it to something quite personal.
Yes, on the home front, at that time, I had a flag store, and the first day was fairly calm, but the second day, when I opened my store, I had a line outside the door, half a block. By the end of the day, the line was a block and a half. By the second day, and I'm sure Al Cavalieri had much the same. By the second day, the line was that long and all the US flags were gone. People were buying anything that was red, white, and blue. We were even selling Liberia and anything. We were selling the Netherlands because it was red, white, and blue. Yeah. It was extremely emotional. And at the end of that period, we were not only out of flags, but all the flag companies in the country were out. It took a year for them to restock enough where you could just order a new flag. So it was and something emotionally felt across the country.
Absolutely. I want to do one more thing. I want to key into the Pentagon. Another thing that came out of that, I recall that in terms of the rebuilding and the restoration of the Pentagon, it's my recollection that the individual that was in charge of that restoration effort, his company finished that under contract, under schedule. And the point being, this was not just another task. This was an American travesty. This was an attack on America. And every one of those individuals in that construction effort were not just, quote, doing a job. They realized how important it was for the Pentagon to be put back the way it was. And so it raised to another level of meaning.
At the time I lived in Washington, and a week after 9/11 or so, I had to drive up to New York State, and every single bridge we passed on the way had an American flag draped over it. So every single bridge all through Pennsylvania, all through Maryland, all through New York State had a bridge on it. It was clearly done by, it wasn't official, the flags differed, but whatever people were in that locality commemorated it by draping a flag over the bridges, every single one.
Okay, thank you.